birds of a feather flock together. And in this case, the birds are all doll fans, and they flock in person at doll shows. But what is a doll show? Why did they start, and what is their purpose in this modern online age? The first published reference to a doll show that I was able to find comes from the Wheeling Register in 1875, which included an advertisement for the Children's Home Benefit, saying, "All the ladies who have promised dolls to the young ladies in charge of the doll show and any other parties who have not been called upon are requested to deliver them to the respective committees as early as possible." The way that this event is not described and is just listed as a doll show implies to me that this is already an event that has taken place for multiple years, or is already a sort of cultural norm. So it's very likely that they had been occurring in one way or another for many years before 1875. Another article from the same paper, which described the event after it happened, said, "The booths were as attractive as ever before, and with the additional charm of wax dolls, china dolls, wooden dolls, rag dolls, dolls with inflexible limbs, with flexible limb, with putty heads, with beautiful heads, with a dull china stare, with no stare at all, had been produced and were offered for sale." The event, which included the sale of dolls, cakes, and other wares, raised $3,000 for a local children's home, which would equal about $100,000 today. And this show was not unique in its fundraising potential. In fact, doll shows were almost exclusively used as fundraising events through most of their early existence. Some other notable examples of these shows were ones that were held in London, including this one in 1875, which was described as a grand doll show, at which all the latest improvements in Dolly's high and low estate were exhibited, had just closed at the Alexandria Palace, London. As a good conclusion to the show, 1,000 dolls were distributed to sick children in the hospital. And there was also the Truth Doll and Toy Show, which began in 1879 and was ran at the Royal Albert Hall. This was another fundraising event for children specifically, with thousands of toys and dolls being gifted to children in orphanages, hospitals, and workhouses. The events would also feature large displays of dolls, some that were for sale, many that weren't for sale, and those would include dolls that were designed after people, such as previous queens of England, or actresses set up in different scenes recreating iconic moments from theater. A doll show at this time would usually include three key features. Firstly, dolls for sale. That was often a major fundraising aspect. Secondly, dolls that were not for sale, so our display dolls. And then third, contests, where dolls would be judged for best outfit or for creating a diorama to go around it. There is a lot of different variety in the doll contests, and they would also often have different age levels or kind of grade levels to go along with them. And the core audience for these events was children. In an advertisement for the Festival of Days event in 1880, they wrote, "Parents are especially invited to bring their children to see the doll show. Dolls of all sorts and sizes will be on exhibition, from the old-fashioned dolls of 25 years ago to the pretty modern babies of the present time." Imagine a time where 25 years ago was the old-fashioned dolls. In an era where children would likely only have maybe one or two dolls in their entire childhood and had far fewer entertainment options, these events and seeing hundreds to thousands of dolls in one place would be much more exciting for them than for kids of today. These were also, of course, places where people could come and see modern dolls. Excluding those old-fashioned dolls from 25 years ago, at some of these larger events, a lot of what people would be seeing was the latest and greatest in toy making, sort of the equivalent of a toy show today. At this time, many of the dolls would also be completely handmade, especially in community fundraising situations. These events would often be run by community groups such as churches or charity organizations, usually with the specific goal to raise money for various organizations or to collect dolls or toys to be given to less fortunate children. At a time where there weren't many protections in place for kids, and there was very little government funding allocated to the less fortunate, community fundraising like this played a huge role in providing social security to those who needed it in their community. These would be a staple community event. By the 1910s, I started to notice a trend where toy stores would actually use the term doll show show to advertise various sales that they would have going on, as well as hosted dress-up contests to give the girls something to do when school is over, with a rule being, of course, that they had to buy the doll that they were dressing up for the contest from their own store, such as this advertisement from the Bon Marché here in Seattle. And while doll collectors would play a role in these events, oftentimes showing their own collections as the display pieces for them, they wouldn't play a huge role in the organization of them until a doll collector named Mary decided it was time to gather the doll fans. In 1937, the National Doll and Toy Collectors Club was created. Founded by Mary E. Lewis, the organization was created when Mary appeared on Mary Margaret McBride's radio show and invited fellow doll and toy collectors to meet her at Hotel Pennsylvania in New York City. 8 ladies gathered there for the first meeting of the National Doll and Toy Collectors Club. Mary Lewis took things one step further, touring the country exhibiting and giving lectures on dolls, while also encouraging other collectors to form their own clubs underneath the national title, which were referred to as units. A 1939 article from the Seattle Daily Times describes the group as the National Doll and Toy Collectors Club of the United States, composed of women who collect dolls as a hobby, plans the establishment of a national museum exclusively for dolls of all ages and nationalities. While the doll museum wouldn't come to be for some time, by the 1940s, 14 units of the club existed across the United States, including one in Seattle. The club became an official organization in 1942, when the 8 founding members signed the Articles of Incorporation and the New York Supreme Court approved them, changing their name to the United Federation of Doll Clubs. From this point forward, we would begin to see a shift from doll shows being hosted by community groups to being hosted mostly by doll and toy collecting organizations. However, they would still usually be fundraising events, such as this Seattle Doll Show in 1949, which was in aid of the Seattle Hearing Society. A collection of photos in the 1946 Seattle Sunday Times presents what a meeting of the group might look like and what they were interested in. Collectors would share their dolls, which were often dressed in various different styles of historic clothing that they would usually be making themselves. And while men have always been involved in various collecting scenes, the first published article, which doesn't just frame doll collecting as a women and children hobby, was in 1957 from the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. In a work titled Guys and Their Dolls, Real Ones Collected by Tough He-Men, they describe, to most of us, the collection of dolls is a hobby reserved for young girls, but for a handful of men around the world, the accumulation of these small figures, many with historical and cultural significance, provides a welcome diversion from the pressures of their busy lives. So in case anybody has tried to make you feel immature for your doll collecting, don't worry, they've been doing the same thing for the past 60 years. But the historical and cultural significance of these dolls was a key part of the appeal for many collectors. Doll collectors loved to be able to share and marvel at the history of their own collections or learn more about other pieces. Lectures about notable doll creators or even just specific individual dolls would become commonplace at doll shows. In 1952, the United Federation for Doll Collectors, or UFDC, would begin publishing Doll News, which is a quarterly magazine which covers doll news, the latest research in dolls, photography, clothing patterns, and much more. And by that time, around 1,500 members had joined the UFDC. The 1960s is when we start to see a general shift in the purpose of doll shows, going from an event that would hypothetically appeal to anyone in the community to being more focused specifically around doll collectors. For example, in 1968, a Seattle doll show hosted a 5-day-long event, which included private exhibits, demonstrations of making and decorating dolls, competitive exhibits, prizes, and tours of the city. 600 UFDC members were expected to attend. And this event is notably not a fundraiser for any organization other than the UFDC. Its entire purpose was for members of the UFDC to meet up together and share their dolls and their know-how in a bit of a more private space. That being said, though, the general public was able to come in for some parts, such as this young girl pictured in another article. Which is cute. This doll show also possibly caused a room shortage in the hotel that it was hosted in, which then caused Richard Nixon's vice presidential running mate to have to stay at the Swept Wing Inn, which is in SeaTac. Oh no! This was apparently news that was very worth reporting on in 1968. I just thought it was so funny. They were like, the manager of the hotel blames the doll show. It's like, okay. An article from 1971 is the first instance that I can find of a specific antique doll show. Because the new and modern dolls of the 1870s were now the antique dolls of modern day. 1970. That being said, the doll shows were pretty similar still to how they were in the 1800s. There would be displays of dolls, dolls for sale, doll contests, but also the addition of speakers and lectures more focused around doll history for the doll collectors that were in attendance. And many of these events were still charity fundraisers as well. Not all of them, but many of them. By 1977, the UFDC had around 10,000 members, and all of those were people above the age of 18. Children weren't allowed. So doll collecting was steadily growing until... By 1980, doll collecting was the second most popular type of collecting in the US, second only to stamps or coins, depending on what source you look at. But we were having a boom in doll collecting. Why is that? A quote from a UFDC event in 1982 describes it well. Dolls are reported to be out of fashion as playthings for little girls these days. But in a continuing recession, collectibles like antique dolls are still promoted as safe investments. Dolls were no longer just something to collect for the enjoyment of beauty or history, but for profit. Money. And notably, as another article describes, many doll shows have more exhibitors than they can handle. At the shows sponsored by the National Federation of Doll Clubs, for example, there are far more people who want to have booths than we can possibly get in. However, collecting antiques for the hope of future profits wasn't the only money-making involved at these shows. Doll crafting and selling actually came back into vogue. For a time, making dolls was not very popular, but because buying antique dolls had become so much more popular, antique dolls were suddenly way more expensive, meaning collectors who wanted the dolls for more than just their possible future monetary value couldn't afford them anymore. Collectors were getting priced out of the hobby, and so some of these collectors learned the skills to create their own replications of these antique dolls and started selling them, or custom making them for people who wanted a specific doll but couldn't afford it. And making these dolls might have been pretty profitable. One collector estimated that around 75% of the booths at shows that they were going to belonged to doll crafters. And also, there were a ton of doll shows happening in the 80s, with one attendee estimating that there were up to 800 shows in 1 year in Florida. And now I've been trying to do that math to figure out how realistic that is. Florida has like around 250 cities. We'll say it had 200 at the time. And that means in at least every city of Florida, there was one doll show per season, which is not impossible, but that still sounds like a lot, considering that if I go on dollshowsusa.com and look at the Florida tab, I think there are 12 listed for next year. So to go from 800 events in a year to 12? That's crazy. There was a lot of focus now around personal profit when it came to dolls. So for these events, they would often still be charity events, but the money for the charity would be coming from either ticket sales from attendees or however much that the sellers were paying to have a booth at the show. The actual money exchanged between like buyer and seller for the dolls wouldn't be a part of the fundraising. So money was still going to charity, just like, wasn't as much as when they were selling the dolls for the sake of raising money. The 80s is also when we would start to see a bit more diversity in doll shows, such as the first black doll show created by Barbara Whiteman, who would later then go on to create the Philadelphia Doll Museum, which is very sadly now closed. One article estimates that around this time, there were up to 70,000 doll collectors in America, with around 17,000 of them recorded as official members of the UFDC. Children were now easily in the minority of attendees at these events, with many of the children in attendance being the relatives of doll collectors who were there to buy. In the 90s, we have a big change in the form of Barbie. Now, of course, Barbie had already existed for decades, but for some reason in the 90s started to become a hot collector's item. And with that, we would start to see a divide in the world of doll collectors. Doll collecting was pretty huge at this point, so there were enough people in the hobby that they could have specific events for just Barbie collectors and specific events for just antique doll collectors. Partly also because some antique doll collectors did not want Barbie dolls at their events. They would oftentimes have really strict rules about how old things needed to be in order to be sold at their antique doll show, and Barbie was not included. The divide that this created would actually go on to affect the doll collecting ecosystem for decades to come. Doll collecting, crafting, and shows would continue to be popular hobbies for people through the 2000s. And the addition of the internet allowed for community access which hadn't existed before, leading to online communities being created around collecting specific types of dolls, such as ball-jointed dolls, as we've discussed before on the channel. With the rise of the internet, eBay started to play a huge role in taking over the sales of collectibles, including dolls. As more people could simply use the internet to find the rare thing they were searching for, going to in-person events like doll shows was no longer required for them to engage with the community. And if the community aspect wasn't really what they wanted, they didn't have to go to shows anymore at all. With all of that, antique dolls were now the most common dolls that you could find at these doll shows. And the audience for collecting antique dolls tended to be on the older end of things. Ball-jointed dolls, American Girls, and Barbies were far more popular with the younger generation of collectors. And by younger in this context, I mean people in their 20s and 30s. And there tended to be less and less overlap between these groups of collectors, as online communities allowed for and sometimes created really isolated groups for discussion about their dolls. So while there were more communities and access to dolls and information than ever, they were also more separated than they had ever been, both by interest and by generation. Doll shows also started to become platforms where people who were not involved in the hobby and weren't collectors were getting dolls from the attic or the basement or their relatives and bringing them to shows specifically to be appraised or to learn their value so they could then go and sell them, especially as the economy started to weaken in 2007 and 8. A combination of the internet pulling sales away from events, as well as there just being less collectors in general, meant prices for dolls actually started to go down. As one collector described it, it's actually a good time to get into doll collecting because prices are depressed. With that, doll crafting slowed down significantly as well, with many people who took on the hobby in the 80s as a retirement hobby now being in their 70s and 80s. And also that core audience of people who wanted to buy recreations of antique dolls weren't really there anymore, because in some cases, the antique dolls were once again affordable to them. Dolls, it turns out, were a bit of an investment bubble that did pop. As an article from the Nashville Doll Collecting Examiner put it, people are cleaning out those rooms full of hoarded investment dolls, and they are flooding eBay, estate sales, and yard sales all over the country. And to those who got angry with me in 1996, 97, 98, and 99, when I tried to warn you that hoarding dolls was not the way to plan for your retirement, let me offer these final 4 words. I told you so. Shows were moving from convention centers and hotel ballrooms to high school cafeterias and senior living facilities. But local doll clubs still played an important role for their communities, for club members as a social and friend gathering space, as fundraising groups for local charities, as well as for preserving and sharing doll history. So, what are the state of doll shows today? I got to attend my first formal doll show this November in Linwood, Washington. This was hosted by the Antique Doll and Toy Market, which on their Facebook describes themselves as Seattle area's best and longest running show for 46 years. 50 select exhibitors. The show was held in what seemed to be a sort of meeting space in the Embassy Suites Hotel. It was a pretty tight space with lots of tables and people packed in. Admission was $10 in cash, which thankfully the hotel had an ATM because unfortunately I am too modern for my own good and never have cash with me anymore. Now this was advertised as being specifically an antique doll show, but they did say in the comments for this event on Facebook that there would be some modern dolls there still. So I was pretty excited and curious about what all I would see there. And though the space was smaller than it apparently was supposed to be, there was like a metaphysical crystal sort of event going on in the larger space at the hotel, and I was kind of eavesdropping, and apparently originally the doll show was supposed to be in the larger space, but something happened, I don't know. But either way, they were using every inch of the space that they did have. Tables were lined with dolls, stuffed animals, doll clothing, picture books, and other trinkets from over the last century. I would say that a vast majority of the items in there were at least 50 years old, if not much older, with a collection of vintage Barbies making up the majority of newer items at the sale. And the stand with the vintage Barbies was also advertising a Queens of the Doll Aisle Doll and Bear show, which this year is also going to be featuring Bill Greening as a guest, which is really cool. They've historically had different toy industry professionals as guests at their events, which I think is so cool. I've managed to miss every event they've held for the last 2 years because for some reason I'm almost always in Canada when they're happening, but I'm really hoping sometime in the future I can go to one. This booth also had the Barbie outfits packaged in these like delightful little packs, which made them seem much cheaper in my mind, and then when I saw the price, I was like, oh boy, that's hundreds of dollars, which transitions great into the fact that these events are not affordable ways to collect dolls today. The people at these events, for the most part, know the value of their dolls, or at least the value that they want for their dolls. And a lot of them are very willing to walk away without sales if they're not getting the price that they want. I'm sure you could haggle with them, but the starting prices are high. That means I did leave the event empty-handed, but I still got to see some pretty cool stuff. Firstly, I came across this collection of small BJD-like dolls, and me and a delightful older lady looked through all of them together. They were actually a collection of dolls made by June Planning and Ars Gratia Artis from 2007 through 2009. I was so excited to see them because I had never seen them before, and the owner of the booth actually didn't have any clue what they were. I tried to explain some of the history of them and pull-up to her, but she didn't seem to know what pull-up was either, so I think some of them might have just been a little bit new for her baseline doll knowledge. Also, maybe I was being a dweeb. I don't know. I was excited to talk about it. They were around $45, which was a bit expensive, but I was like, this would be really cool. It's a doll I've never seen before. But then the delightful old lady I was looking at them with bought my 2 favorite ones. Which, fair enough. Enjoy your disposable income, queen. Another exciting find for me was this Nancy doll, which is the perfect Nancy doll, by the way. This is what Nancy looks like. Nancy is a comic strip. I love the vintage Nancy comic strips. They are a delight. And so when I saw this doll, I was like, wow, this could be a fun introduction to me collecting antique dolls. So I saw it, And then like I did a few laps of the room and I was like, okay, there's nothing else I really wanted. I'm gonna go look at that Nancy doll again. And then I saw she was $350. I am not ready to be introduced to the world of antique dolls, actually. I'm not sure if this event featured any doll makers. Most of the dolls there did seem to be antique dolls rather than antique doll replicas. However, I don't have a good enough eye to be able to see the difference. But because doll making became so much less popular through the 2000s, ironically is now very popular again with ball-jointed dolls. That's not what this video is about though. But yeah, I don't think there were any there, but I'm happy to be wrong. Two dolls that I did not expect to find there were two High School Musical dolls, specifically the ones that were designed using the Teen Trends doll body. This was such a weird thing to see. I saw their smile and I was like, are those Teen Trends? No, they look different. They are the High School Musical dolls everybody told me about in my comments because I didn't know about them when I made the Teen Trends video, but now I know, and I've seen them in person. But they're wearing very vintage style clothing, and so I got to talking to that booth owner as well, and she had no idea what the dolls were or what they were made for, but we had kind of a delightful conversation about like that size of dolls and American Girl dolls, and also Magic Attic dolls, which were her preference. It was a really wonderful moment in getting to like share what we knew about and cared about with dolls. And I think that was my favorite part of the event overall. I just love to talk dolls and to hear about dolls and to see people excited about seeing dolls. It just brings me a lot of joy. Now, because this event was specifically a market, there wasn't really the time or frankly the space for me to really have conversations with people about the dolls. It was really packed, there were a lot of people around, and I didn't want to take up space from a paying customer. I knew my budget. I wasn't there for that. My past experiences with other things like toy shows have been pretty similar to this in that they're designed as kind of market spaces and not so much as community spaces, and don't really have that community aspect I've been reading about when doing this research. I really hope other shows today strive to achieve that. That's part of the reason why I wanted to highlight the Queens of the Doll Aisle show, because I do think having industry members come and speak about dolls and toy design is a great way to keep some of that industry knowledge and history sharing alive at these shows, and allows for more space and time for actual community building at them. In this modern era as well, I'm pretty sure that contests are just not a thing at doll shows anymore, which I think is sad. Like, I get judging them would be hard, and like, who makes the dolls and what are the, like, it could be complicated, but it would be fun. Bring back doll dressing contests. That's like the drama I want, is just who won the best dressed at the doll contest. While we do have the internet as a resource today, I know firsthand how much of the doll information we have online has been recorded as a labor of love from select people who have the time and know-how to do things like create a website or edit a Wikipedia article. Dollect and Looking Brats are two great examples of these resources that have been incredibly helpful in my own research. But as some collectors, especially those in the world of antique doll collecting, continue to age, I do fear that we are going to lose some of that history and knowledge that hasn't been able to be shared online. As I finished my last lap at the doll show, considered buying a 1962 World Fair stuffed wiener dog, and decided it was time for me to head back home and finish editing my last video, I saw one last booth I had missed on my way in. One that didn't have a ton of dolls on it, just some papers. A booth for the United Federation of Doll Collectors. That's right, the group still exists today. They'll be hosting their 77th annual convention next year, and currently consist of groups within 15 regions across the United States and one international region. With the pandemic in 2020, the organization really had to shift towards using digital resources, and now hosts Zoom gatherings for presentations on things like custom rainbow high dolls to the Santon dolls of southern France. Variety. Some regions are holding some in-person events this year. My region, which is Region 1, doesn't look like it's hosting anything online, but it just doesn't have anything listed. The thing is, there are a number of different local clubs within that region, and if I wanted to join one of them, I would just need to contact my regional director to help me find which one. But I found cold emailing someone a little bit intimidating. I'm sadly very used to the luxury of just being able to like search when an event is and then go to that event and not have like a middleman. For these clubs, there are websites that will literally have a list with like a name and phone number and email address of just the leader of the club, and you just need to reach out to them, which I know in the grand scheme of things is fine, but it just feels a little invasive for me. Why is your phone number on a website? That freaks me out. If that also feels a little weird to you, don't worry. You can still join the UFDC as a member at large, so not specifically affiliated with any one group. Membership is $42 a year, but that does include a subscription to Doll News magazine, which still exists, is still published quarterly, and that makes your membership basically $10 an issue, which compared to how much magazines are today, it's kind of worth it. So I am considering a membership, is all I'm saying. And they also do offer a variety of different benefits and resources, such as access to their archives, as well as their audio and video library. But remember that divide I brought up earlier between Barbie collectors and antique doll collectors? Well, that divide would only get deeper and deeper as time went on. There's a reason why the market I went to didn't really have many dolls from the last 20 years. And the ones that were there, their sellers didn't know much about them. There is a pretty distinct split in collectors, and that can make it hard for communities like doll clubs to continue to thrive if they're not willing to open up the conversation to more types of dolls. Members of the antique doll creed need to be willing to accept modern dolls also as works of art and as things that have importance. And modern doll collectors need to have some curiosity and interest into the dolls of days past. But like I was talking about before, if people like me are a little too intimidated to like cold call or email someone from an outdated looking website, they're not going to be able to join these clubs or organizations. And those people also aren't going to be able to do things like making online resources for the community that are easier for everyone to access. Websites like dollclubs.com and dollshowusa.com are great resources, but if you look at them, you might not always realize that they are in fact up to date. They are in a format that most young people aren't super used to seeing or using. And I'm not saying that people have to change or modernize. In fact, I love how these websites look. But I would really love it if doll collecting could build larger in-person communities again. As amazing as the internet is, I do think it's genuinely so good for us to interact with other people in person, especially other people who have the same interests as us across generations. So I might try and be brave and look into joining my local community, and I highly recommend that if that's something you want, you look into it as well. And remember, if you go and the vibes feel off, first of all, we always got to do a self-check. Are people just reflecting back the energy you're giving out? Did you yuck someone's yum? Are you showing interest in other people's favorite things in the same way you would want them to show interest in yours? Yada yada, check yourself. But if not, and the vibes are bad, step away and consider perhaps even making your own club. You can even contact the UFDC about doing it officially through them. So that's kind of fun. I really loved, through doing my research, learning about how much the doll community has done historically in order to support each other, support the research and sharing of information about dolls, and support their larger communities with the fundraising they've been doing for over a century. And I just really hope we can continue to show that care for each other going forward. I think in a lot of ways right now is a really scary time in the world. And sometimes the best thing that we can do to combat how scary things are is to share the things that bring us joy with each other. Now, one little note before you comment anything, I do want to say, this video is researched using mostly newspaper article archives, which will never really give you the full breadth of one subject. There's always going to be gaps and information missing. There's a reason why I mentioned a lot of Seattle newspapers through the 30s. For some reason, they only had Seattle newspapers for that time period. I don't know why. But like I'm saying, I might be missing information. So if you personally had a different experience with doll shows or know of different experiences with them or more about their history that I missed, please feel free to share. I would love to know more. To end this all off though, I think as people in a hobby together, the best thing that we can strive to do is trying to have positive and constructive conversations. Something that I've been repeating to myself kind of a weird amount lately is that I exist in the reality that I create for myself. Now, I know that that's a mouthful, but basically what I mean by that is I'm curating what's around me. If I'm mean to other people, they're going to be mean back. I know that my behavior is going to affect the way that other people treat me. And along with that, if someone treats me in a way that I don't like, if somebody is mean, block them. Walk away. Get help from someone else and take care of yourself. But also, try and show kindness and patience with other people. Never let someone be cruel to you. But also, don't take away the opportunity for you to be kind to somebody else, because you never know if they need it. We're all just humans trying to figure things out. Seek community, love dolls. There's your history lesson of the day. Thank you all so much for joining me. This originally was just going to be a vlog, and then I wonder what the history of doll shows are. And then I made this. I hope this was fun to listen to or watch. I genuinely just love learning more about communities and the history of dolls as a cultural piece and touchstone. I would love to know if there are other resources about doll shows that I just didn't find in my research. It's possible. Again, I'm human. We're being nice to each other here, okay guys? But I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you are staying warm. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye!